My name is Aria, I'm 42, and I never thought I'd be sitting in a courtroom, fighting against the man I once promised forever to. My husband tried to steal half my fortune, something I worked years to build. That day, I carried an envelope that changed everything. And when the judge read it, he laughed at him. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and subscribe for more true stories of family drama, betrayal, and courage. The first time I stepped into that courtroom, the air felt heavy, as though the walls themselves knew the weight of the secrets being dragged inside. My heels clicked against the polished floor, each step echoing louder than the last. My chest tightened, but I forced myself to hold my head high. I wasn't there as a victim. I was there to fight for what was mine. Across the room, my husband, well, soon-to-be ex-husband, sat with his lawyer. He leaned back in his chair, arms folded, smirk playing at his lips like he'd already won. He looked at me once, a quick glance, the kind of look that said you've already lost. It was the same look he'd given me countless times during our marriage whenever I stood my ground. But today, it carried more arrogance than ever. I took my seat beside my attorney, a woman named Dana. She placed her hand lightly on mine, whispering, "Stay calm, Aria, let him dig his own hole." Her voice was low, steady, almost soothing. I nodded, though inside, my thoughts raced faster than I could contain. The judge entered, his black robe swaying as he sat down, lifting the gavel and striking it once against the block. The sound cracked through the room like a gunshot. My heart jumped, but I held my breath, forcing a calm exterior. The proceedings began. My husband's lawyer wasted no time. He stood tall, his voice firm but rehearsed. "Your Honor, my client dedicated years of his life supporting his wife's ambitions. He sacrificed opportunities of his own to help her build her business. He deserves half of the fortune she's accumulated during their marriage." The words rolled off his tongue like a performance he had given 100 times before. His voice carried just the right amount of pity, painting my husband as some poor, overlooked man who gave everything only to be left behind. I wanted to stand up and shout the truth, that he had never sacrificed anything, that he had mocked my dreams, that he had spent money recklessly while I worked long nights. But Dana's hand pressed lightly on my arm. "Patience," she whispered. My husband sat there, chin lifted, nodding as if every word was gospel. He didn't even blink when the lawyer claimed he had supported me. The truth burned inside me like a fire. Supported me? He had dragged me down. He had laughed at me for clipping coupons, for skipping nights out to save money, for refusing to buy things we couldn't afford. But here, in this courtroom, he wore the mask of a man wronged. The judge scribbled something on his notepad, face unreadable. I watched closely, searching for a flicker of emotion, but nothing showed. His poker face made me uneasy. Dana rose when it was her turn. She spoke calmly, confidently, laying out the facts of my financial independence, my late father's inheritance, the way I had grown it carefully over the years. But even as she spoke, my husband's smirk never faltered. He whispered to his lawyer, the two exchanging quiet chuckles like they already knew the outcome. And that's when it hit me. He thought I had nothing, no evidence, no protection, no plan. He thought he had already stripped me bare. I sat still, but my hand moved to the strap of my purse where the envelope rested. A simple brown envelope, sealed tight, but heavy with everything I needed. I could almost hear my father's voice in my head. "Always prepare, Aria. One day it will matter." The sound of shuffling papers snapped me back. My husband's lawyer presented a chart of my earnings, painting me as greedy, selfish, unwilling to share. My husband leaned forward now, eyes fixed on the judge, waiting for the approval that would hand him half of what I built. But the judge said nothing. He adjusted his glasses, cleared his throat, and turned his gaze to me. "Mrs. Cooper," he said, his tone level, "do you have anything you wish to submit before I make a decision?" The room stilled. I felt every eye on me. My husband smirked wider, almost daring me to speak. I reached into my purse. My fingers brushed the smooth surface of the envelope, my lifeline. For a moment, I hesitated. My pulse pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. This was it, the moment that could change everything. I slid the envelope across the table to Dana. She gave me a quick, knowing nod before walking it up to the judge. The sound of her heels echoed in the silent room. My husband tilted his head, eyebrows raised in mock amusement. He whispered something to his lawyer, both of them chuckling again. The judge opened the envelope, his eyes scanning the paper inside. Seconds ticked by like hours. My stomach churned, my hands gripping the edge of the table until my knuckles turned white. Then, just for a moment, the judge's lips twitched. A chuckle, a quiet laugh that broke the silence like a crack in stone. My husband's smirk disappeared. "What is that?" he demanded, his voice breaking through the stillness. The judge didn't answer right away. He simply looked up, his eyes sharp, his tone steady but edged with something almost amused. "We'll get to that, Mr. Cooper," he said, and in that moment, for the first time in years, I felt the balance shift. The judge's quiet laugh still echoed in my ears when my vision blurred, not from tears, but from memory. In that instant, sitting there in that cold courtroom, I was no longer a 42-year-old woman staring down her ex-husband. I was a little girl again, sitting at a worn oak table in a modest kitchen, watching my father count every dollar like it was gold. He used to tap his thumb against the stack of bills, humming softly as if rhythm made the numbers easier to face. "Aria," he would say, his voice warm but firm, "money is never just money. It's safety. It's choices. And one day, it'll be the thing that either saves you or traps you." I didn't understand back then. Not really. I was more interested in doodling in the margins of my notebook or sneaking a cookie before dinner. But the words stuck like seeds buried deep in the soil of my mind. Now, decades later, those seeds had grown into armor. I remembered the night after his funeral most vividly. I was 24, still stumbling through life, working at a small grocery store while trying to figure out what came next. My father hadn't left a fortune, not even close, but he had left me a check, modest but intentional, with a letter folded neatly beside it. I had sat on my bed, the paper trembling in my hands. His handwriting was slightly shaky by then, the curves less steady, but the message was clear. "This is yours, Aria. Don't let anyone take it. Grow it, protect it, and remember, this is not just money. This is a reminder that you are capable, resourceful, and stronger than you know." I read those words 100 times that night, the ink smudging where my tears touched the page. That inheritance wasn't much, enough for some people to dismiss as insignificant. But to me, it was a lifeline. It was a chance to start something, to build a foundation, to prove to myself that my father's faith in me wasn't misplaced. Years later, when I met my husband, I kept that check locked away. By then, I had invested it carefully, slowly building it into something more meaningful. Not extravagant, not flashy, just steady, a safety net. But my husband never understood. I remembered one evening, not long after we got married, when he found me sitting at the kitchen table with my budget planner spread out. He laughed, shaking his head. "You treat this like a science experiment. Come on, Aria, live a little." I looked up at him, pen in hand. "I am living. I'm just not wasting." He rolled his eyes. "You really think saving pennies is going to matter someday?" "Yes," I said, firmer than I meant to. He chuckled, kissed the top of my head, and walked away like it was all a joke. But in that moment, something inside me tightened. I remembered my father's words, "Don't let anyone take it." I thought of another night, years later, when the tension between us had grown sharper. Bills were piling up, not mine, but his. Credit cards maxed out, expenses I hadn't agreed to. I confronted him at the kitchen counter. The same spot where my father had once taught me about safety and choices. "What is this?" I asked, holding up the bank statement. He shrugged, chewing on a piece of gum. "Just a few things I needed. Don't worry about it." "A few things? These are thousands of dollars." My voice trembled, not with fear, but with anger. "You promised we'd plan together." "Relax," he said, smirking. "You've got your little nest egg, don't you? What's the point of having money if you're not going to use it?" My stomach twisted. He had never called it that before, your little nest egg. The words dripped with envy, with entitlement. That night, I sat alone on the couch after he went to bed, clutching my father's letter in my hands. The paper was worn, the ink faded, but the message had never been clearer. And now, in that courtroom, I felt my father's presence stronger than ever. The hum of the fluorescent lights above, the shuffle of papers, the tapping of pens against desks, all of it faded into the background as his voice replayed in my mind. Money is choices. I thought of the choices I had made. The long hours, the sacrifices, the nights when I said no to parties, to new clothes, to vacations, just so I could make every dollar count. I thought of the evenings I spent studying personal finance books instead of watching TV, determined to honor his legacy. Money is safety. I thought of the nights when my husband stormed out after an argument, slamming the door so hard the walls shook, and how, even then, I knew I wasn't trapped because I had built something on my own. Something no one could take, not without a fight. Money will either save you or trap you. And here I was facing the very trap my father had warned me about. My husband thought he could twist the truth, play the victim, and walk away with half of what wasn't his. But I had the envelope. I had proof. I had my father's words as a shield. The judge cleared his throat, dragging me back into the present. He was still reading, still processing. My husband shifted in his seat, his smirk flickering for the first time. Dana leaned closer, whispering, "Remember why you're here. Remember who you are." I nodded slightly, but inside, I was already whispering back to my father. "I remember, Dad. I always remember." And as I sat there, in the heart of a courtroom that smelled faintly of dust and polished wood, I realized something I had never admitted before. I wasn't just protecting money. I was protecting a promise I had made to my father when I first read his letter, to grow it, to guard it, to never let anyone reduce it to just money. It was more than numbers. It was proof of love, of belief, of resilience. And that was something my husband would never understand. In that silence, before the judge spoke again, I found myself tracing the edge of my purse with my fingertips. The envelope was no longer just paper and ink. It was my father's hand reaching across time, pulling me back to steadiness. And though I didn't know yet what the judge would say, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. No matter how this ended, I had already won in the way that mattered most, because my father's words had carried me here. And they weren't about to fail me now, because my father's words had carried me here. I found myself walking back into the silence of our home, with ears still ringing from the judge's gavel, and the echo of my father's voice in my memory. The weight of that courtroom scene lingered, but something heavier waited behind closed doors, the slow unraveling of my marriage. It didn't happen with a loud bang or a single betrayal. It came in whispers, in tiny fractures that seemed invisible until I realized I was standing on broken glass. The first time I noticed, it was over something painfully ordinary. Groceries. I had come home with bags cutting into my arms, my wrists red from carrying too much. He sat on the couch, scrolling on his phone, glancing at me, but making no move to help. I dropped the bags onto the counter, eggs nearly rolling onto the floor. "Couldn't you at least help me with one of these?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. His eyes flicked up, cold and dismissive. "You should have called me if you needed help. How am I supposed to know?" It wasn't the words, it was the way he said them. Like my needs were an inconvenience, like my exhaustion was a weakness he could mock. My father's voice whispered again in my head. Never let someone make you smaller to make themselves bigger. From that day, I began noticing the little things he no longer did. He stopped asking about my day. He stopped joining me at the table for dinner, instead carrying his plate into the living room to eat in front of the TV on our anniversary. He forgot completely, not even bothering with an excuse. I had dressed in a soft blue dress, candlelight flickering, wine poured. He walked in late, tie loose, smelling faintly of perfume that wasn't mine. I stared at him, heart hammering. "Do you know what today is?" He blinked, as if searching for the answer, then smirked. "Tuesday?" That single word was sharper than any knife. I blew out the candles, their smoke curling into the air like the last breath of something sacred. The crack deepened. Nights became longer. I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling while his even breathing filled the room beside me. My chest would ache with questions I never dared to ask. Why was he colder now? Who had he become when I wasn't looking? Was the man I had married still buried somewhere beneath the sarcasm and distance, or had he disappeared completely? The turning point came one evening when I overheard a phone call. He was in the study, door slightly ajar, voice hushed but tinged with excitement. I paused in the hallway, breath caught. "No, she won't know. She never pays attention," he said, laughter sliding into his tone. My stomach dropped. Every instinct screamed to burst in, to demand answers, but I froze. Instead, I backed away quietly, heart pounding in my throat. That night, I couldn't bring myself to ask him who he was talking to. I needed to be sure before I confronted him. So I watched. I began noticing how often he left the house without explanation, how his phone was always turned face down on the counter, how he carried himself with a secret he thought I couldn't see. One Saturday morning, I asked casually, "Do you want to go to the farmer's market with me? Like we used to?" He didn't even look up from his phone. "I've got things to do." "What things?" "Just things," he said, annoyance sharpening his voice. The wall between us grew higher, brick by brick, until I felt like a stranger in my own home. One night, I tried again. We sat across from each other at the table, silence heavy. I pushed my plate away and asked softly, "Are we okay?" He looked at me for a long moment, then chuckled without humor. "Depends what you mean by okay." Tears stung my eyes, but I held them back. My father's words steadied me. Your strength is not for him to measure. I realized then that love shouldn't feel like begging for scraps. The cracks in our marriage weren't sudden. They were carved slowly by neglect, disrespect, and secrets. But once I saw them clearly, I couldn't unsee them. And I knew with a bone-deep certainty that something was about to break. The courtroom felt colder that morning, though maybe it was just me. I sat at the plaintiff's table, fingers laced tightly together, knuckles white. My heart was a drum inside my chest, steady but loud, echoing in the hollow space of my ribs. Across from me, my husband leaned back with a smug smile, like he'd already won. He had always carried that air of certainty, as if the world would bend to him simply because he demanded it. But today was different. The judge adjusted his glasses, gaze sliding between us with the kind of weary patience that came from years of listening to people tear each other apart. "Counsel," He said, clearing his throat, "I understand there is additional evidence to be submitted?" My lawyer nodded, her hands calm and practiced, though I knew she understood the storm inside me. She reached into her leather briefcase and drew out the envelope. It wasn't large, plain manila, its edges slightly bent from the number of times I had held it, wondering if I'd be strong enough when this moment came. But as soon as it was placed on the judge's desk, the entire room seemed to shift. My husband leaned forward now, confidence faltering just enough for me to notice. "What is this?" he muttered, his voice sharp, though low enough that only I could hear. I didn't answer. My eyes stayed fixed on the envelope, my father's voice whispering in the back of my mind. "The truth doesn't need to shout, Arya. It just needs to stand." The judge opened the flap with deliberate care, sliding out the papers inside. The sound of shuffling sheets was louder than it should have been, each turn of the page slicing through the silence. His brow furrowed. He read, lips moving faintly, expression tightening with every passing second. "What exactly am I looking at here?" he asked at last, lifting his gaze. My lawyer stood. "Bank records, Your Honor, property transfers, and emails, all detailing my client's husband's deliberate attempt to conceal assets with the intention of defrauding her during these proceedings." A murmur swept through the gallery. My husband's face drained of color, and his lips parted as if to argue, but no sound came out. He glanced at me, then, eyes wide, the bravado gone. "That's not," he finally stammered. Those aren't real." The judge raised a brow. "Are you suggesting these are fabricated?" I don't," he fumbled, tugging at his tie, as if it were suddenly strangling him. The judge held up a page, tapping it lightly with his finger. "Because if that's your claim, sir, you'll need to explain why these documents bear your name, your signature, and, in some cases, correspondence from your own email address." Laughter rippled quietly from the gallery. My husband's jaw clenched, his eyes narrowing into slits. I stayed silent, but inside me, emotion swirled, relief, fear, a sharp edge of triumph. For weeks I had held this envelope, knowing it carried the truth, yet terrified of what it would unleash. Now that it was open, the air felt clearer, though no less heavy. The judge turned to me. "Mrs. Dawson, did you come across these records yourself?" My throat tightened, but I forced my voice steady. "Yes, Your Honor. They were in a shared folder on our home computer. He must have assumed I'd never look. But I did." My husband slammed his palm against the table. "This is ridiculous. She's twisting everything." The gavel cracked down, sharp and commanding. "Enough. One more outburst, and I'll have you removed." The silence that followed was deafening. I breathed deeply, my hands still trembling, but I met my husband's glare with something steadier now. He had underestimated me. He thought I would cower, like I had so many times when the cracks in our marriage widened into chasms. But this was different. This was no longer just about hurt feelings or broken promises. This was about truth and survival. The judge flipped through a few more pages before setting the file down. He leaned back, steepling his fingers. "It appears, Mr. Dawson, that not only have you attempted to deceive your spouse, but you may also have committed perjury in your previous statements to this court. This is extremely serious." Whispers rippled again through the courtroom. My husband's face reddened, beads of sweat forming at his hairline. He shot me a look, one that carried years of unspoken anger. But beneath it, I saw something else for the first time. Panic. The kind that cracks a mask wide open. The kind that exposes a man who had built his entire identity on control, only to realize it was slipping through his fingers. I sat a little taller, not out of arrogance, but out of something my father had always urged me to carry: dignity, even when wronged, even when betrayed, especially then. The judge gestured to the clerk. This evidence will be reviewed in detail. For now, it will remain on record. I'll allow a brief recess before we continue. The gavel struck again. The sound was final, resonant like the breaking of a chain. As people began shuffling out, my lawyer leaned toward me. That went as well as it could have. I nodded, though my hands still shook under the table. I didn't think I'd get this far. I whispered. You did, she said firmly. And you're stronger than you realize. I watched my husband storm out of the courtroom, his stride stiff, his fists clenched. His world was unraveling. And for once, I wasn't the one left behind in the wreckage. The envelope had been opened, and with it, so had a door I could never close again. When the gavel struck and the courtroom emptied, I felt something inside me unclench, like a knot finally coming undone after years of tightening. My husband had walked out red-faced, muttering under his breath, his lawyer trailing behind with a look that said, "This case is over." I stayed seated a little longer, letting the quiet sink in, letting the weight of what had just happened wash over me. The envelope, my father's last gift, had saved me, but now came the harder part, figuring out who I was without him, without the marriage, and without the shadow of constant betrayal. As I stepped out of the courthouse, the autumn air was crisp against my skin. Leaves swirled across the steps, gold and brown, crunching under the heels of strangers passing by. Reporters weren't waiting. This wasn't some celebrity scandal. It was just another case filed under family disputes. To the world, I was another woman who had survived divorce. But to me, it was the moment I took my life back. My friend Linda had driven me to court that morning, and she stood by the car now, waving me over. "Well," she asked, eyes wide, searching my face for the answer. "It's done," I whispered, sliding into the passenger seat. My hands trembled as I gripped my purse, the courtroom still echoing in my mind. Linda reached across, squeezing my hand. "You're free." The word landed heavy. Free. It felt strange, like it belonged to someone else, not me. For years, I had built my life around a man who had slowly chipped away at my confidence. And now, without him, who was I? The first week after the trial was harder than I expected. I thought I'd wake up each morning with relief, maybe even joy. Instead, I woke to silence. The house, though the same walls and furniture, seemed hollow. No sound of him slamming the bathroom door. No footsteps pacing the kitchen. At first, the silence was unsettling. I'd catch myself listening for noises that never came. But then, slowly, I began to fill that silence with my own choices. I played music in the mornings, soft jazz while I made coffee. I cooked meals I actually enjoyed, instead of the heavy dinners he preferred. I even started leaving dishes in the sink overnight without guilt, something he used to criticize relentlessly. One night, I sat on the porch wrapped in a blanket, staring at the stars. I remembered how he once told me stargazing was a waste of time. Yet here I was, breathing in the cool night air, realizing it wasn't a waste at all. It was peace. Still, freedom wasn't just about peace. It came with its own fears. Bills arrived in my name, and the responsibility of keeping the house sat squarely on my shoulders. One afternoon, as I balanced my checkbook at the kitchen table, panic bubbled up. The numbers didn't lie. Money was tighter now. For a moment, doubt crept in. Maybe he had been right. Maybe I wasn't strong enough to handle this alone. I closed my eyes, hearing my father's steady voice in my memory. Your strength isn't measured by what someone else thinks you can't do. It's in what you prove to yourself you can. I took a deep breath, opened my laptop, and began searching for freelance work I could do from home. Writing, data entry, small projects, anything to stretch my independence. By the end of the week, I had secured 2 part-time clients. The pay wasn't huge, but it was mine. Every dollar earned felt like a small victory. One Sunday, I bumped into my neighbor, Carol, while pulling weeds in the front yard. She leaned over the fence, smiling. "Haven't seen him around," she said cautiously, as if testing the water. "He's gone," I replied simply, brushing dirt off my gloves. Her eyes softened. "Good for you. You deserve better." The conversation was short, but it left me with something unexpected: support. I realized people had noticed the cracks long before I admitted them myself. And instead of judgment, there was quiet approval. That evening, Carol brought over a plate of cookies, and we sat on the porch laughing about small-town gossip. It wasn't about cookies. It was about connection, about remembering I wasn't as alone as I felt. Freedom also meant confronting the ghosts of my marriage. One afternoon, while cleaning the closet, I found one of his old shirts tucked behind a stack of sweaters. For a moment, I froze. The fabric smelled faintly of his cologne, and memories flooded back. Our early days, the laughter, the promises. I sank onto the floor, shirt pressed against my knees, tears slipping silently down my cheeks. But as the tears dried, I realized something important. I wasn't mourning him. I was mourning the woman I used to be, the one who believed love meant enduring pain. With a steady hand, I folded the shirt and placed it in a box for donation. Letting go wasn't easy, but it was necessary. Over the next months, I began rediscovering myself in small ways. I signed up for a pottery class at the community center. My hands fumbled clumsily with the clay, but the mess made me laugh, a sound I hadn't heard from myself in too long. I started walking at the park every morning, watching the sun rise over the lake. Sometimes other women would join me, and we'd chat about everything from recipes to childhood stories. Slowly, my world expanded again, filled with voices that weren't sharp or cruel, but warm and genuine. One evening, after class, I sat at my kitchen table shaping a small bowl. The clay felt cool and alive in my hands, grounding me. For the first time, I thought, this is mine. This life, these choices, they're mine. But freedom wasn't just about hobbies or friendships. It was about courage, the courage to face the mirror and admit that money had never been the real prize. The courtroom fight had been about protecting what my father left me, yes, but the deeper battle had been about reclaiming myself. One night, I journaled late into the evening, writing words I hadn't dared say aloud. I am more than what was taken from me. I am more than his cruelty. I am still Aria, and I am enough. As I closed the notebook, a quiet calm settled over me. Months later, Linda invited me on a short road trip. We drove through winding country roads, windows rolled down, the wind tangling our hair. Somewhere along the way, she glanced at me and said, "You look lighter." I smiled, watching fields of wildflowers blur past. I am. Because freedom wasn't about half a fortune or even winning a case. It was about breathing without fear, laughing without permission, and living without apology. That night, back home, I sat on the porch again, stars glittering above. For the first time in years, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel broken. I felt whole. And in that quiet, I finally understood money could be taken, love could be betrayed, but freedom, the kind that comes from knowing your worth, was beyond anyone's reach. I wrapped my blanket tighter, whispered a soft thank you to the night, and let myself believe in tomorrow. Because tomorrow was mine.